Hello, gorgeous. Welcome to HG Radio, everything beauty, cancer, and inspiration. Here is your co-founder and host, Kim Becker.
Hello, gorgeous, and thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Kim Becker, and this is Hello, Gorgeous, everything beauty, cancer, and inspiration on Society Bites Radio, social interaction for the mind and soul. Our guest today is Lori Yacobi. In September, we celebrated Menopause Awareness Month, and creating menopause awareness, or as Lori likes to call it, getting smart, is one of her primary coaching activities. When she was hit out of the blue with her symptoms, it rocked her confidence, strained her relationship, and made it possible for her to find calm and balance in everyday life. When researching what was happening, she was frustrated by the lack of information, or worse, the widely ranging opinions and misinformation about menopause. She started a blog as a way to document her experiences and share useful resources with others. Her blogging connected her with several social media outlets related to menopause, where she found time and time again that the stories were the same as hers. Women all over the world being blindsided by symptoms and not knowing where to turn for help. Lori couldn't sit on the sidelines any longer. She knew that she needed to be more of an active part of the solution. The combination of her master's degree in human resource development, 25 plus years of developing instructional programs, and experience as an athletic coach and a Weight Watcher leader led her to menopause health coaching. She spent 4 years learning about menopause, including certifications in the third age women peri to postmenopause and nutrition coaching. These days, she's dedicated to working with women to recognize their symptoms and provide tailored plans to navigate menopause and build a healthy foundation for many years beyond it. Hi, Lori, and welcome to the show.
Hello, how are you, Kim?
I'm doing well. I am so excited to have you. You know, it was interesting. You and I had a conversation a couple of months ago, and we kind of danced around the possibility of you having your own show.
Yes.
And so as we were talking, it was so funny. I thought about it and I thought, you needed to be a guest on my show because of what cancer treatment does to women. There are so many times where they put her in menopause, depending on the type of breast cancer, whether it's estrogen driven or, hormone driven, or if it's something where she's had something to do with an ovarian cancer. And I thought the information that you have and the knowledge that you have to share would just be phenomenal for our guests. So I am so grateful and so excited to have you on our show today.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure.
So let's start with the basics. What is menopause and when does it normally happen?
Yeah, so this is a great question to start with because I think the first step in getting smart is to understand common terminology just to make sure that everybody's singing off the same sheet of music. So for most women, they will experience natural menopause. So in natural menopause, I tend to think of it in kind of three phases. So the first phase is perimenopause, and that's the time leading up to menopause. So it's the time when your hormones begin shifting, and it can begin in your mid-30s or early 40s, and it commonly lasts between 7 and 10 years, which is interesting because I think historically it was thought to only be about 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then menopause occurs when you've gone 12 months without a period. So it marks the end of our reproductive years. So technically, menopause is 1 day or even 1 second. It's that moment in time when you've been 12 months without a period.
Okay.
But we often use that term, and I probably will today, just to refer to any of those symptoms that relate to our changing hormones. But in natural menopause, the average age in the United States is 51.2, if you want to be exact.
Wow.
But the normal range can be anywhere between 35 and 60.
Wow. I can't imagine going through menopause at 35. I mean, I didn't have my son until I was 35.
Yeah, it's. I've talked to many women who have gone through menopause even at 37, natural menopause at 37. And I was having dinner with somebody very recently who is 48, and she said, "Oh, I've been through menopause early." And I said, "Well, not really. When you think about the average being 51, 48 isn't that far off of the average." So
right.
There is a little bit of misunderstanding. I think people think of it as something that happens in your 50s, but it really can happen anywhere in your most typically, mid 40s to about 60.
Mm.
And then our final phase then is postmenopause. And so then that's all of that time after your 1-day birthday of having no periods for 12 months, you're then in postmenopause. And for most of us, that can be, 20 to 30 years of our lives is spent in postmenopause.
Wow.
So those are go ahead.
I was just going to say, so then what are some of the symptoms associated with menopause? Like, how does a woman know that are there other things besides going without a period for 12 months that are symptoms of menopause?
Yeah, there sure are. But before I get into that, I just want, because I think for your listeners, some of them may be interested in the term induced menopause.
Oh, yes, please.
So what we were talking about before was sort of the 3 phases that happen in natural menopause, but in induced menopause, that occurs when menopause is caused by a medical treatment, as you were referring to earlier.
Yes.
So if you've had both of your ovaries surgically removed, then menopause occurs on the day of surgery. So you don't have any of that perimenopause lead up that we were talking about. And as you also mentioned, some drug or radiation therapies actually damage the ovaries and shut down hormone production. And so that can also cause menopause. Wow. So there's sort of these two, there's the natural menopause, which most women will go through, but there's also induced menopause that can occur as well.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
So then let's talk about some of the symptoms that are associated with menopause.
Yeah. And I think, most of us, you see the comics and hot flashes or night sweats are kind of the predominant thing that, come to mind when you think about menopausal symptoms. But other symptoms, there's actually 34 recognized symptoms related to menopause. And
really?
I promise I won't go through the list of 34, but there's some that are sort of these psychosomatic types of, I'm not sure I'm using the right word, but types of symptoms like memory lapses and brain fog, crying spells or sadness. A lot of women experience irritability and anger. Some women report feeling panic or anxiety or even depression. There are symptoms related to, kind of our reproductive area. So vaginal dryness is a very common symptom, loss of libido. Some women experience urinary tract infections or incontinence. And then there are a lot of physical symptoms as well, like hair loss or hair thinning is very common, bloating and weight gain, especially around our bellies, headaches, or some women even experience migraines, itchy skin or tingling in your extremities, and breast and joint pain is also quite common. So probably the most important reason to be aware of this broad range of symptoms is just to recognize them for what they are and realize that, you're not going crazy, because I think a lot of women experience, these things start happening to them that they're not used to, and they think, oh my God, I'm just going crazy. And it's just because they're not necessarily aware of this, how broad the range of symptoms can be.
Right. And so would these symptoms be the same for someone who had faced induced menopause?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. Women who experience induced menopause can experience the same symptoms. But the one thing that's important to note is they don't have that typical perimenopausal experience where they've got this gradual transition leading up to their final period. So instead, with surgical menopause, menopause occurs abruptly on the day of surgery, and with menopause induced by drug treatments, there may be a short transition as the damaged ovaries shut down the production of hormones. So because of this more abrupt loss of hormones in induced menopause, typically women experience more drastic symptoms than women who go through natural menopause.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that, but you're right. It's probably just such a shock to the system that what was there didn't slowly leave your system. It just abruptly was removed. So that would
Yeah.
make sense.
Yeah, that's the going in thought right now.
So what are the causes of these symptoms?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think most of us are aware that our hormones, start to flux as we go through this transition. And there's a bunch of hormones in our bodies that sort of work together, like a symphony is a good way to say it. And so when those hormones start fluctuating, it's kind of like one instrument in the symphony maybe starts to be a little off key. But estrogen and progesterone, I think, are two of the key hormones to talk about. And those are the two of the hormones that our bodies start to produce less of. And as we talked about, this fluxing is going to be more gradual in natural menopause and more abrupt in induced menopause. But I think the reason to talk about progesterone and estrogen is that these two hormones are not only important for our reproductive functioning, they actually have important tasks to do all over our bodies. So they are responsible for functions in our brain, in our muscles, in our gut, in our breasts, in our eyes, our heart, our lungs, and our blood vessels. So if you think about decreasing levels of estrogen and progesterone in all of these places in your body, you can kind of start to see why some of those seemingly unrelated symptoms we just talked about could be linked together as symptoms of menopause.
Right. And do you recommend anything? So is there, and I'm going off a little bit, but so, I mean, I've heard of women that go through like hormone therapy, but obviously It's synthetic hormone. It's not a real hormone. Or is there some sort of a supplement or something that they can take to kind of help as they go through these symptoms to make them less drastic?
Yes, for sure. For sure. So hormone therapy has kind of gotten a bad rap in the early 2000s, but it is widely proven to address many menopausal symptoms, particularly the vasomotor symptoms, which are like your hot flashes and vaginal dryness. And the bad rap that hormone therapy received in the early 2000s has actually since been disproven. And so hormone therapy is now considered safe for most women without adding a risk of an increased risk in breast cancer. The current guidelines from the from the North American Menopause Society is to use the lowest dose for the shortest amount of time, and that's typically 5 to 7 years. But even for women who are unable to take hormone therapy, there are many non-hormonal medications that are available, as well as alternative medicine and supplement options that can relieve those symptoms. And I think the best thing to do is to just sit down and have a conversation with your doctor about the best course of action for your particular situation.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. So if a woman was beginning to notice some of these symptoms, what's the first piece of advice that you would give her?
Well, not surprisingly, I'm going to stay on my bandwagon about getting smart as step one.
That's right.
And the reason for that is there's really a significant lack of education around menopause. And that's both for us as women as well as for our health practitioners. So, for example, with regard to women, there was a study done in 2018 where more than 80% of premenopausal women said they were only moderately aware of what to expect in menopause. So kind of just like I was. But that same survey found that the more women knew about menopause, the less effect it had on their lives. So, in that sense, knowledge really is power.
And why do you feel that it's so taboo for people to talk about menopause? I mean, there's so many, it seems like the world today, people talk about everything, especially with social media, right? You put your whole life up online. Why is it that this seems to be such a taboo subject?
I think I'd be a millionaire if I knew the answer to that question. Part of it is I think that the study of menopause is really still in its infancy. Women didn't even live long enough to, have much of a life post-menopause until the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. So, and then there was a long period of time when nobody talked about it, and therefore it wasn't really studied. So, and I don't know, maybe it's a little bit like childbirth that, once after you've given birth, you kind of forget about the pain of it. Yeah. So women who have experienced it didn't really feel the need to talk about it. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of reasons that could play into why why it's such a taboo subject, but I'm working very hard to dispel that.
Well, and I'm grateful for that. It's interesting for me. So I'm the oldest of 4 girls. I have 3 younger sisters, but our mom actually had a hysterectomy actually shortly after I was married. So I don't know, 1993, and I was 26 when I got married. So because my mom had a hysterectomy, she never went through menopause. So I didn't even have that. My mom is still here and she's still with us, but I couldn't go to her and say, well, what was that like, or what age? Because I believe, is it a little hereditary? Can you kind of go through the guidelines? Like if your mom went through it early, you're going to go through it early?
I don't know that. I believe, yes, it is hereditary, but every woman experiences it a little bit differently. So for example, I went to my mom when I was really struggling, and, my mom was basically like, that's interesting, because I just sailed right through it. So I didn't have the same experience that my mom had. So I really think it is individual. I do think there's a lot of lifestyle factors that play into it as well. So, women who, for example, we know that women who smoke tend to go through menopause earlier than women who don't.
Interesting.
So I think just like almost anything these days, right? It could be partly genetics and then partly lifestyle as well.
Well, like I said, I'm grateful that you're bringing a lot of this up to the surface just for that reason, because again, the person that you trust the most, right, is your mom, that you can go to these female questions with, and she would just say, I don't know. I didn't go through that. I didn't experience that. So I think the work that you're doing is very important for women like myself who want the answers to these questions and, what's next kind of thing. Now, what do I do? So, So what are some of the examples of actions that women can take to address their symptoms?
Well, we already talked about, one of the categories, which is, the solutions that are prescribed by medical professionals, hormone therapy and other kinds of medicines. But then I also like to think about regardless of whether you choose hormone therapy or other medications, there are actions that you can take that not only are going to make a difference in how you experience menopause, but, will also contribute to your optimal health in all the years beyond menopause. So I group these into what I call cornerstones. There's 4 cornerstones, and those are sleep, stress management, nutrition, and movement. And those are the cornerstones that I coach around.
And why these 4 areas?
Well, I coach around these because I believe in controlling the controllables. And, these are all areas that most of us can control. Mm-hmm. And, the really interesting thing that I found is how interrelated these areas are. So in other words, if you focus on making small changes in one of these cornerstone areas, it typically leads to positive changes in the others. So, for example, if you're chronically stressed, it's going to impact your sleep. And when you're fatigued, you have less motivation to go for a walk or take a class at the gym. And certainly grabbing some takeout on the way home feels a lot simpler for dinner than, slicing and dicing vegetables. But if you begin to employ some stress management techniques, for example, going outside for a walk, working on some deep breathing techniques, or taking yoga, then your cortisol levels will start to return to normal, and then you sleep better. And if you're more rested, you may feel like you have more energy to go for a walk, and you may feel more motivated to make more mindful nutrition choices.
And I have found that myself. It's interesting. I try and get up and work out in the morning because I find if I do, then I've set myself up for success for like the rest of the day. But I find that if I don't get up and work out in the morning, then I'm not as apt to eat as healthy as I should. I'm not as apt to to get the water in like I should. But it's really interesting when you set yourself up for success like that.
Right. And I think, the other thing to keep in mind is, menopause itself is kind of a stressful time. And it's important to try to make mindful choices in one or more of these areas. But it's also important to be kind to yourself.
I agree.
So if you have one of those days that you were just describing where you don't get up in the morning and do your exercise, and maybe you don't eat as healthy as, you would have liked to, that's okay. But it doesn't mean you're a failure, and it doesn't mean you can't do it. You can't start all over again the next day. So
that's right.
Just being sort of gentle to yourself and not, creating rules that you'll never be able to stick to on a regular basis.
Tell me, share with me one of your success stories so far. I know you've done some coaching with women, and, I know you're blogging and stuff. Like, do you have a success story that you can share with us with a woman that you just kind of helped get to the other side?
It's funny that you said that, to get to the other side, because actually that's one of my mentors uses that analogy for hormone therapy. She says it's great to use as a boat to get to the other side. So,
it is.
Sorry, that's just an aside. So I think one of my success stories, again, it just starts with helping her understand what's going on with her body. That in and of itself is empowering. It sort of relieves the stress of knowing that you're not going crazy. And then, I tend to use just a very simple sort of step-by-step approach. I don't prescribe any specific diet because I think diets generally aren't successful because they're too rigid. So, we just started with one simple step, which is, hey, how about, let's try to get 10 minutes of walking in the outdoors in every day. And then, hey, let's just try to make time for 5 minutes of, some mindfulness and some deep breathing to bring your cortisol levels down. And, each little step creates success, and then creates a little more motivation to want to try the next thing. So, so right now we're working on reducing the amount of processed foods and added sugars in her diet. And each step is resulting in just a little bit more confidence and a little bit more, I don't want to say happiness, but just, certainly she's happy, but it's just more that sort of that confidence and exuding more confidence in her daily life.
Sure, she's got to be feeling better. And
right.
So because she feels better, then the ripple effect is that if she's working, she's a better employee. If she's a mom or a grandma, she's a better mom or grandma. So, you probably see the ripple effect of what you're doing because she feels better about where she's at right now.
Exactly.
So to learn more, what resources are available for women?
Well, we've already certainly talked about one, which first and foremost is talk to your doctors,
right,
to discuss where you are, in your journey, and determine whether or not hormone therapy or supplements might be appropriate. But beyond the 20 minutes that most of us have with our doctor, it might be helpful to seek out a coach, whether that's a health coach or a nutrition coach or a personal trainer or a menopause coach like me, who can provide, more personal education and support and accountability on a regular basis. And then I also suggest that the North American Menopause Society website, they've got some great information and tools and resources for women.
Awesome. And where can our listeners find you?
Well, my website is mymenopausenavigator.com.
And then do you have like a Facebook group or anything either too?
I sure do. And that is also My Menopause Navigator.
Awesome. Well, we're almost out of time. Lori, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and to share the work that you do. If you have any questions or comments or would like to know more about the guest on our show today, or for more information about Hello Gorgeous, feel free to contact me at kbecker@hellogorgeous.org or visit our website at www.hellogorgeous.org. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or download our mobile app. Thank you for joining me today on Hello Gorgeous, Everything Beauty, Cancer, and Inspiration. I'm your host, Kim Becker. And until next time, stay gorgeous.